Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Gurur Devo Maheshwaraha, Gurureva Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Chinmayam Vyapiyat Sarvam Trailokyam Sacharacharam Tatpadam Darshitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. The notion we have about ourselves that we are at this moment this individual, limited, finite, with a beginning and an end, birth and death, with certain limitations. In fact, we know ourselves as these various roles and identities, as well as qualities that we have taken upon ourselves. This sense of individuality is philosophically called as the ego, and we keep on addressing ourselves with this notion. When we keep on saying I, or I did this, I am so and so, it is always this I associated with something, with a role, etc. And this notion we carry so strongly with us that when we hear of a greater knowledge, in the back of our mind, this I, this ego, because of which we think we have our existence, because we know ourselves not more than that. And therefore, when it is said that on inquiry, this I dissolves, vanishes, then suddenly a fear comes into this ego that I know myself only as this, and it looks like the complete annihilation of me. And in fact, we have seen in the very introduction itself that none of us want to die. And why we do not want to die, and we have got also resistance to change, it is because by nature itself we are infinite and changeless, imperishable. Therefore, Bhagavan says that when we inquire into this I thought, into this mind, into this ego, when we inquire into it, it is like almost like magic, or you can say, just as there is fog and everything is covered, and the moment the sun rays penetrate through the fog, the mist just disappears. It is as magical as that. However, we who think that I exist as this ego, there is naturally a fear as to what will happen to me then. And now, in the next verse, Bhagawan Ramana Maharshi points out something wonderful. And he says, Ahaminashabaj yahamahantaya sfurati rit swayam paramapurnasat. Ahaminashabaj yahamahantaya sfurati rit swayam paramapurnasat. Sfurati rit swayam paramapurnasat. Ahami nasha bhaji. When this I thought, this ego, this I associated with the various roles and identifications that we have, when those identifications come to an end, it is not that we become nothing. Remember, when an illusion ends, the substratum on which the illusion was appearing, that substratum is recognized. And therefore, Bhagawan Ramana Maharshi says that just as in the place of the illusory snake, we recognize the rope, in the same way, when this illusory I, this ghost of the ego, disappears, in its very place itself is discovered as I. Not that I cease to exist. In fact, I recognize myself to be devoid of all these illusory, delusory identifications, attachments, and limitations. And the real I, who truly I am, shines forth and is experienced as I only, not as an object. And in one's own heart, by itself, alone, it shines. So, Sfurati Rit Swayam. And here, the rishis and Bhagwan emphasizes that this I is Parama. This is the final, the supreme I. Otherwise, this ego, when it bloats itself, gathers to itself more richness, etc., it seems to expand, or even more power or people under his or her command or position. And yet there is always something more to achieve. But by saying Parama, it is the supreme I, and which is Purna, which is infinite, complete, unconditioned, unlimited, and Sat, changeless, ever-present existence. Once, I was just standing in the balcony overlooking the ocean, and I was in contemplation. At that moment, clouds gathered in the sky, and the first few drops began to fall. And if you're watching carefully, you can actually see in that drizzle those drops falling. I was in my contemplation, and in my mind I could hear this conversation. One drop telling to the other drop, oh no, we are going to fall into this vast ocean and drown and come to an end. And the other drop says, to think about it, we will end this limited form of ours to become the vast ocean, to become one with the vast ocean. In the same way, when this limited, conditioned I, the ego, when its conditioning dissolves, that pure I, which was appearing as this ego, does not cease to exist, but shines forth in its supreme, unconditioned nature as permanent existence. Because if we think, and sometimes when we think logically, or even sometimes in our inner mind, even unaware, these fear, anxieties, attachments, notions remain, and therefore we have a resistance to this knowledge. In fact, recently, one person told me, Swamiji, I love to listen to the discourses and Vedanta, but when these words come like death, etc., I don't know, and detachment, I just don't like to hear it. I get frightened. Because when we think our existence to be finite, temporary, and limited, and this notion the ego has, we are afraid of death, afraid of change, afraid of sorrow. But when these limitations, which are only illusory apertures on the self, when they are dissolved, there itself shines forth the Supreme Self as the true I, eternal, complete, and therefore of the nature of bliss. Having said that, one more clarification is needed, because we have the notion that this individual I, when it ends, then maybe it is the total I, the I of God, of Ishvara. To clarify very clearly, Bhagavan tells us that when this limited I dissolves and the real infinite I rises, in that there is no distinction of Jiva and Ishvara, individual as well as totality. Bhagavan says, Idamaham pada bhikkhamanvaham ahamalīnake pyalaya sattaya. Idamaham pada bhikkhamanvaham ahamalīnake pyalaya sattaya. Ahamalīnake pyalaya sattaya. Idam aham pada abhikhyam. This which is known as I, the Supreme I, alaya sattaya, due to its indestructible nature, when the two I's merge. Which two I's? The individual I, and with the individual I, the total I. All this has been called as Aham I. Just to give you an idea of total I, see, just as you work as an individual, and then when you have a family, Whenever you speak of yourself as the unit of a family. When you lead a company or you identify with your nation, when you say I, your I identified with the family or the nation or the totality, that feeling that you have of that identification, also you talk of it as I. So the total I means the Ishvara. And what Bhagavan points out here, that when the individual I is dissolved, so also the total I dissolves. And what remains there is the pure nature, pure existence, the pure I, which functions in the equipment of the totality as well as the equipment of the individual. So when the individual dissolves, the total also dissolves. Now, you mean to say the world comes to an end? We start feeling all these notions in our mind. And I remember when we used to listen also, these notions come to our mind and it gets a bit confusing. How many eyes are there? In simple words, when the individuality comes to an end, the notion of totality also comes to an end. To directly experience this, think of it. Before you go to sleep, you have your individuality. I remember once I was traveling by train, and it was in an unreserved compartment because I had to take this quick travel many years ago. And I was traveling in this unreserved compartment. It's an experience. You have people literally all over each other, plus you have basket of chicken and different fruits, vegetables, and gunny bag fulls of certain things. People are sitting literally on these gunny bags. People are sitting on the aisles. And there were a number of people, different type of people. And there was this person who was chewing betel nut. His clothes were very dirty and he was smelling also. And besides that, there was a man who was dressed in white clothes but happens to even buy an unreserved compartment ticket because there were no tickets available. And every time would tell this person, stay away from me, stay away from me, stay away from me. Was trying to get his place somewhere else or pushing this person away. But it was an amusing sight at night to watch. All distinctions of various things come to an end. I was watching because I couldn't sleep. So I was watching how each one was just falling over each other's shoulders. And this very man who was hating every moment, criticizing people coming close to him, people putting their gunny bags in front of him, when he had gone to sleep and his individuality had for some time merged into sleep, he was literally on the shoulder of this other man who was, according to him, very dirty, smelly, because even when the individuality is gone, all distinctions of others go away. So in the place of this individual I, it is not the total I that rises. When individuality has ended, so also the totality, these equipments of individual and totality, both which are superimposed on the one infinite self, comes to an end. It is like this. As long as the wave has its own identity, when it looks at the ocean, there is a vastness in the ocean, and it sees its own birth and its own death, and sees other waves as terror. But when that wave merges into the waters, by the end of the notion of that limited wave, the distinction between the wave and the ocean comes to an end, and what you discover, that the essence, the reality, which is appearing both as the individual or the total, as the wave or the ocean. In fact, the wave does not become the ocean. The wave realizes that I am the water, and from the standpoint of water, there is no wave or the ocean. There is only water, and that its pure essence, its pure nature, on which both these are superimposed, the limitedness and the vastness. That real water, which is the essence of the wave, which is the essence of the ocean, its true I is discovered. So the wave does not, in expression we say, becomes the ocean, but really speaking, the wave was always water, and it is water and water alone that is there, which exists, because of which there can be this individual or the total. So what arises here is that indestructible self, not the individual or the total. Now, having explained this, let us again just recap so that fearlessly, with enthusiasm, we continue our inquiry to discover this great, this mighty, in fact, even greater or even mightier or even transcending all greatness and mightness, the infinite self as I. Bhagawan had started the discussion with that when you inquire what is this mind, in fact, the mind itself that creates all the distinctions, differences, identification comes to an end. And when we inquire what is the mind, we recognize that there are only two types of thoughts in the mind, aham vritti and idam vritti. And aham vritti is that on which idam vritti is dependent upon. Therefore, without I experiencing or I thinking, I doing, there is nothing experienced, nothing that is done. So when we recognize that this idam vritti, this thought of any object is dependent upon the I thought. But this I thought also seems to rise and set. And when we inquire, from where does this I thought arise? From where does this ego arise? Wonder of wonder. This ego also vanishes. But we don't become nothing. We don't become non-existence. The real I, which is of the nature of pure existence, and that I which is infinite, is discovered. Now, how to inquire into this I thought, into this ego? Inquire, who am I, is the theme, and where Bhagawan Ramana Maharshi takes us through this inquiry to make us discover, who am I? Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om.